This week marks the debut of our Trans-Tasman column, appropriately entitled Underarm. Our Underarm correspondent is Sydney-based journalist Lachlan Cahoon, who joins me now. And Lachlan, you're writing about the possibility of Australia moving to nuclear power, which you describe as a kind of a culture war of climate change. Tell us about what's going on.
Yeah, I'll just give you some context on this, Maria, to start with. I mean, Australia, for example, we have the third largest reserves of uranium in the world, and we export all of that, almost all of that. So we account for about 8% of world uranium exports. We only have one nuclear reactor in Australia, and that's in Sydney at the ANSTO site. That's used for scientific and medical reasons. But we've had a legislative moratorium on the use of nuclear power for many years, and plans for a nuclear storage facility have been rejected several times, most recently last year in South Australia. However, the Conservative coalition, led by Peter Dutton, say that we now need nuclear power to firm up our power supply, and it's the cheapest way to get to net zero by 2050, and this is where the culture war comes in. They say they'll launch a detailed plan soon and they'll take it to the 2050 election. And their spokesperson on energy says, if you're not serious about nuclear, you're not serious about net zero. And they say we can have a nuclear power plant up and running in Australia in 10 years. So it's very political, the context for this. It's a wedge or a spoiler issue. It's also to do with the fact that the Liberal Party are in a coalition with the National Party, who are regionally based, and they are very much against renewable energy, which they say is taking up too much rural land. And essentially, there's a big deal of skepticism on that side of politics about the reality of climate change, and so this is kind of their counter to the government's push for renewable energy.
Yeah, but interestingly, of course, the coalition did badly on the issue of climate last time around, so that's obviously not sharpened their thinking. Is there actually much support for this?
Well, I think it's fascinating because what happened in the election last time was that the coalition lost a lot of inner urban seats, which they had held for many years, and that was largely on the climate issue. And they lost those seats to so-called teal independents, who weren't they were all independents, but they weren't organised as a party. But one thing they did have in common was that they took votes off the coalition because they were more committed to the climate change issue. But it would seem that with this move, the coalition has really almost given up on the idea of reclaiming those seats and sees the path back to government as in the regional areas and in outer suburban areas where people are less affluent, and they're not sort of part of this so-called sort of woke elite who like renewable energy and drive EVs. So it's very much a wedge issue, very much about a culture war, and also there's a class element too, which is bizarre given that historically the Liberal Party has been the party of the upper middle class, and we seem to have this turnaround in political orientation, largely over this climate issue. But you ask whether it's popular. There's been a couple of polls on it. One found that 52% of people were in favour of overturning the moratorium that we've got, and the support was slanted towards younger people, which I found interesting. But there was another poll. It asked people which was their most preferred source of energy, and people were able to answer with a couple of responses. Solar was the most popular, 83%, but nuclear was way down at only 36%. So you'd have to say, as far as the coalition is concerned, hardly a groundswell, politically risky, but once again, it's about political differentiation in the market.
So what's the government saying about this? What's been their reaction?
So the National Science Organisation in Australia is the CSIRO, and they came out with a report late last year in which they said that renewables, wind and solar were by far and away the cheapest option for Australia. And so they've been attacked by Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, who says that they haven't taken into account the cost of transmission, which the CSIRO says they have. And so we had the very unusual scenario this week of the head of the CSIRO coming out and saying, look, it's all about the science. We're not political about it. We've done a completely rigorous analysis of it, and nuclear power just does not stack up. Chris Bowen, who's the energy minister, the Labor energy minister, there's a famous film in Australia. I don't know whether people know it in New Zealand, The Castle, but there's a great line in there where the guy says, "Tell him he's dreaming," and so that was what Chris Bowen said about Peter Dutton's plan for nuclear energy. He reckons it's going to cost $387 billion. for Australia under the coalition plan. Also, the major energy companies are lukewarm. The only one that sort of expressed any interest was Energy Australia, which is owned by China Light and Power, and they've got a nuclear power plant in China. But even so, they say that we won't get a nuclear power plant until the late 2030s or early 2050s.
Lachlan Colquhoun. So Peter Dutton is dreaming. Thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure, Maria.
For more content just like this and all the latest business and political news, head over to mbr.co.nz.